So we're recording this session, but don't worry, this is not going out to a wider audience. This is more so you guys have it for later. Again, I need the bathrooms that way. You need water and espresso that way. If you hate the presentation, want to leave, it's not going to bother me. Go ahead, walk right out. But I am Brennan Woodruff. We are here as part of Tech Chicago Week, which is Tech Week, but for Chicago, as I understand it. This is my first Tech Week. This is the first one I've really been local again. So I actually like for the people that are in the audience to know who the hell they're talking to, who the person is at the front of the room. So I'm Brennan Woodruff, if you didn't already figure that out from my Luma messages, my promotion of the event, and my name tags. But I am the co-founder, chief business officer, chief operating officer of GoCharlie. It's a generative AI platform for creating content at scale, as well as creating conversational commerce experiences. Talk a little bit about what that means a little later. But prior to this, I was at a couple different companies you may have heard of. I started my career at this place called KPMG down the street, big building called the Aon Center, if anyone's familiar. Not the most aesthetically pleasing building, but tall, great, beautiful views. So we like that, I guess. Decided that I was wanting to work with a team internationally based. So I was in Munich for a year, and then they invited me to join their team in New York. So I bounced from there to New York, mostly focused on cross-border M&A, post-deal integration. Then I took a very long Uber X from New York City out to San Francisco, worked for this company called Uber. You may have heard of it. You may have used it to get here. I did bikes, scooters, self-flying, self-driving. Uber is a platform, and then ultimately helped them IPO. Not the biggest pop of an IPO, but one of the largest public fundraisings of all time, which is pretty great. That wasn't chaotic enough, though. So I decided to go to this other crazy place called SoftBank's Vision Funds. Any of you guys heard of them? So largest venture fund ever raised, probably not going to be the best performing venture fund ever. But I did get a bird's eye view to over 100 plus AI companies that we invested in over the course of the summer. I know there's a couple of VCs in here. I do not recommend investing at that pace. It's very hard to diligence, very hard to make sound decisions. But when you think that everything's going to go up for a long time, maybe you invest like that. Decided that they were probably not in a great position, decided that the real fun was happening at the portfolio company level. And so I decided to make my craziest move yet to a pre-product, pre-revenue startup called GoCharlie. Talked a little bit about that, but maybe a little personal news. I have been a 35 times groomsman. That's my fun fact every time that I present. Actually working on the sequel to 27 Dresses, the movie, if you've ever seen that. But I was born and raised in Evansville, Indiana. I'm a tried and true Hoosier. So if there's any Hoosiers in the crowd, I hope our basketball team's better this year. And I am a Chicago Boomerang. So have all sorts of opinions on San Francisco, New York, AI, Hoosier, basketball, you name it. Come talk to me. If you want to connect, that's my Papa logo. You can just scan that. That'll give you my LinkedIn. Everything that you could ever want to contact me on is pretty much on there. But what are we going to talk about today? So I think that's the most important thing. You guys came to learn. I came to teach. Came to learn as well, probably learn a little bit from myself in presenting this, but we're really going to talk about what is this wave of AI? What does this mean for retail as it pertains to operations, engagement, and selling? And then what I really want to focus in on and hone in on is a topic that's probably near and dear to everybody right now is how should you be approaching AI solutions? How should I be thinking about implementing this technology? And at the end, I want some time for questions. And then of course, we're going to go get beverages at Marshall's Landing, which is probably everybody's favorite part by the end of the day. But feel free to ask questions throughout. This is not meant to be like, I'm just going to talk to you for 30 minutes. I'm pretty entertaining as a presenter, but even I have my limits. So like ask the questions that you're thinking. This is a safe space. No one's going to be mad if you do. So I think one thing that I love to stress with any presentation that's going to focus on AI, any presentation where we're dealing with technology is that like, we're getting beat over the head with AI right now. Me as a founder in AI, like I kind of have to do that to people. But what I want to stress is that like, it's fine no matter where you are on your journey. Like it is okay to be a novice. It's okay to be an expert. It's okay to be somewhere in the middle. That's where most of us really are. But it's a process. It's a journey. Like no brand has it perfect. If they did, they wouldn't tell you and we wouldn't know. What I will tell you is it's an iterative process. It's an ever moving goalpost. So don't feel like you have to be an expert. What you need to think about is, how does this technology benefit my business? Where am I at on this scale? Am I just discovering solutions? Am I implementing and trying and iterating? Am I feeling like an expert? Am I leading the charge for our AI initiatives? Really, it's a journey. So I want to stress that before we jump into anything else, because I think it's super important to not expect perfection right out of the gate with this stuff. But I think also important is to understand, like, what the heck are we even talking about? So for all of you guys, before ChatGPT came out, did you know that AI existed? I hope that everyone in this room does, but you would be surprised how many people I have met, especially from my hometown. They had no idea that AI existed before ChatGPT. More surprisingly is how many people think that AI is just ChatGPT. That's kind of scary building in this space, but also a uniquely fun challenge. It's important to note that artificial intelligence is like this large concept. It's a massive industry. It's been around since the advent of computing, if not before that. But what we're talking about today is mostly focused on this last circle, which is generative AI. And really think about generative AI as different from like previous iterations, as more it's machine learning that produces net new information or net nuance information. It's trained on a lot of data. It's trained on a lot of things. I like to think that it's just going to accelerate you getting to where you may have already went, because it has billions and billions of reps of doing those things. Generative AI is not going to be that Terminator thing. It's not going to be the thing that takes over the world. I don't believe it's the path to AGI, if you guys want to get into the technical, but I like to keep this not too technical of a conversation and mostly just focus on generative AI as a subset of a much larger field. AI can mean a lot of things, but today's presentation will mostly focus on how generative AI is working for retail and how we expect it to benefit retail in the future. So then that gets into, well, how should I think about this stuff, right? So I think there's a lot of ways that people think about it. Some people think about it as a companion. There's a whole AI girlfriend industry. I'm not really a fan of that, but that's the way a lot of people like to think about it. I like to think about it in these three transformative ways. The first is turning unstructured data into structured. What does that mean? If you've ever had to piecemeal together a bunch of analytics platform exports and then try to derive insights, that's where generative AI is going to be playing. That's where you should be looking to implement it now, because it can take large amounts of data, way larger than what we can, and doesn't have to stitch them together in a bunch of different Excel columns and try to figure out how to make sense across those relational databases. The second way is basic task assistant. I feel really bad that I did Clippy like this, but if you've ever used the old Microsoft Office suite, that's Clippy with some googly eyes, because everything's better with googly eyes. But I say basic task assistant because you're not going to have a good time if you're trying to offload your thinking. You are going to have a good time with generative AI if you try to direct it. You try to give it the guidance of like, hey, do this, use this, but you're not going to have a good time if you're just assuming it knows your previous context, assuming that it has the same knowledge that you do. It might be ever knowledgeable in terms of like field of study and breadth of study, but it's not going to know what you want by reading your mind, at least not yet. But the last way is what I think is the most fundamental opportunity of all of this, which is computers got kind of sick of us trying to learn how to code. I think that, funny enough, when you really think about it philosophically, English was the original programming language, or maybe even some ancient languages were the original programming language. But I like to think of it in more of like a Pixar way, which is computers got sick of us trying to learn how to talk to them, so they learned our language. That means that computers can now operate in natural language, whether that be voice, typing, slang, whatever you want to call it. Computers and technology will now be interoperable in the same languages that we use to talk to one another. But easier way to think about AI is, prior to AI, you kind of had to choose between these three. Has anyone in here seen this triangle before? I imagine everybody. It's a way that you think about software procurement. My fiance is not back in the room, so it's a way that you think about maybe partner procurement, cost, speed, quality. It's all trade-offs, right? You had to pick two of these in the past. You had to pick like, hey, I want it to be cheap and I want it fast, so the quality is probably not going to be there. I think that that trade-off no longer exists, and you're starting to see it come through. You're starting to see agencies evolve into new layers of working with technology. A big Oprah reveal here, like, you can have all three. You can have it all. This is the way that you do it. I think AI is going to enable us to have quality, cost, and speed all be perfectly balanced if you learn to utilize it correctly. That's where the investment in learning this technology is going to benefit you in the long run. I think that the value of AI can then be further explained if you think about it in these concentric circles. So operational efficiency, improved customer experience, and then hyper-personalized, high-velocity selling. All of these things just mean that your brand is going to grow, it's going to grow more efficiently, and you're going to be more engaged with your customers in a way that's not previously possible. All of those things seem to be at odds with one another in the past, and AI is kind of your glue to make all of that happen in the future. Now, this would normally be the part of the presentation where everybody says that AI is not going to replace you, but someone that uses AI will. And I've said that quote in many presentations previously. And I think the long and short of it is that AI is going to replace you if you don't invest now. I'm not here to be a scare tactic person. I know I'm a little biased because I'm building AI solutions, but I have seen AI agents do some pretty incredible things. There's a wave of technology coming that will be able to replace people's jobs. But what it won't be able to replace is organizations, because organizations are complex things. They're complex, multifaceted objectives that people are trying to achieve. And so I want to leave you with this quote instead, which is that if you invest early, you invest in terms of time, dollars, learning, you will reap the benefits of that. You will outperform your competitors. You will have learned what they will learn years, months, days later that will enable you to have more unique interactions, be uniquely positioned to capitalize on growth opportunities, and engage with your customers in a much more authentic way. So AI is not going to replace you yet, but if you invest now, you will reap the benefits over the long term. Any questions on my little triangle of trade-offs before we jump into retail? No? Either all makes sense or it's really terrible and no one wants to say. We'll see. We'll find out. All right. So what does this mean for retail? Apologies, I like to highlight AI in pink. My marketing officer does not like when I do that, but that's what we do. So we talked about these concentric circles, but I think it's making it all work together. But the best AI strategies are going to link data across different organizations, different teams, all in service of these three goals, which is top line revenue, engaging customers, and creating operational efficiency. How do I invest the least amount of money to get the most amount of return in a way that makes my customers happy? So let's dive into that operational efficiency piece. I think this is a really interesting way for us to think about this. So for each one of these three buckets, I've tried to position as themes that we're seeing out in the market. These are by no means collectively exhaustive, mutually exclusive. There's a lot of different things that's impacting the future of retail. But for each one of those themes, I have companies to check out. Now, full disclosure, Charlie's mentioned in some of them, but there's some other really interesting companies that are working in these spaces that I wanted to make sure that we mention. So the first, I think, is the most tangible to all of us, right? We all got ChatGPT, we all went crazy, everybody is happy, everybody's like, oh my God, my productivity is going to skyrocket. And then you realize that everybody had that productivity gain now, and that advantage quickly diminished. But I think that's the first line of defense here, is superhuman employees. Superhero employees. The best way that I like to think about AI is like you have this exoskeleton that you're using. I don't know if anyone's a Power Rangers fan or like BattleBots or anything like that, but it's basically like you're putting on the suit of armor that makes you this ultra productive worker. Now, for some people that haven't learned how these tools work, maybe they don't realize that superhero benefit for a little while, but that's like the first step of this. But then I think what gets super interesting is now productivity gets super enhanced because every team is going to have an AI teammate. So you're no longer talking about exoskeletons, you're talking about a whole nother player on your team. And that's where it gets interesting. But I think the biggest thing I want to impart about that theme is that you have to invest. You have to onboard these technologies. You got to give them access to data. You have to make sure they use the right tools. You got to make sure that they learn what your goals are. And then they act as this ever-on teammate that can do things while you're sleeping, while you're not working, or maybe while other teams. Welcome in. Okay. So companies to check out in that category. Obviously, Charlie helps a lot with that. So we have a tool that you can sign up for. You can use that for day-to-day productivity tools. But the second theme here is data accessibility. So if you guys remember, one of the topics that we talked about, or one of the ways to think about this technology, is computers now know how to speak our language. They can speak in English. What happens when data is now manipulatable or usable or queryable and natural language. Well, that means everybody can be a data analyst. Everybody can ask the hard questions. You don't have to wait for the data team to send you what you need. So now you're talking about everybody making more data-driven decisions in a way that accelerates you being able to take action. One of the best companies I've seen in this is Glean. So Glean goes a step further. Rather, instead of qualitative and quantitative information, you can now query across every single app in your company. What if you were a CEO and you could say, hey, what is the product team doing and how are they progressing on the next month's release? And it's just there. You don't have to go bother your product team. You don't have to context switch them. You don't have to pull them into a meeting. We're talking about being able to accelerate decision-making just by using natural language across the data you already have. So that's a huge benefit that I think you're going to see benefit operations both from an executive level, but also the day-to-day. Everybody's going to be able to make decisions off the same data lakes. Last piece here is inventory optimization. I think Peak AI is doing a really good job of this, but I would be remiss if I talked about retail operations and didn't think about supply chain. It's the number one thing. It's the number one thing that causes cash crunch. It's the number one thing that is causing you to not be able to meet customer orders, causing you to not be able to make sales. It is literally the lifeblood of most retail operations. And so you're starting to see some ways where AI is not only making predictive decisions about how much inventory you need to move, but is also now considering way more data points than ever previously possible, considering macro events, micro events, and feeding all that data in. Notice that I'm saying a certain word a lot of times. It's going to come back in later presentation, but that's just on the operational side, right? So I think this quote kind of sets us up for the next piece, which is how do you engage? So more and more brands are harnessing the power of AI, but this particular stat I think is insane. 35% of Amazon sales come from its product recommendation engine. 35% come from a system that customers don't even knowingly interact with. That is insane. Of a company that is one of the few trillion-dollar companies. And so when I say that AI is going to be impactful for engagement, this is the type of thing that I mean. There's AI technologies that are literally going to interact in ways with customers that they don't even see. But if you invest in them, they're going to be able to drive sales, 35% of all Amazon revenue. That's pretty insane. So on the customer experience side, right? So the first is the rise of the 24/7 brand. Kind of have this with like static experiences, websites, e-commerce sites. I think we're increasingly realizing that every business is becoming a 24/7 brand. Now that means a lot of things for how is my brand going to be global and resonate globally? How is my brand going to be able to answer questions on a 24/7 basis? The answer is AI. I think one of the things that is often under-discussed about this technology is that most of the 24/7 brand operations right now are, I'm going to put a call center in a third world country. Well, how many times have you guys been on the phone and not been able to understand or not been able to get the answers that you need, or they had to go to someone else and you get stuck on hold? What happens when AI is able to handle those in a way that actually gets to results, actually gets to good customer experiences? That's the 24/7 brand that I think we're headed towards. And we're developing technologies where people can converse 24/7 within your bounds, within your guardrails, and able to actually drive great customer experiences. I think the second piece is that web experiences are evolving in a very interesting way. I think one of the benefits of this generative technology is that you are no longer subjected to just the same experience every time you come to a web page. You might have a completely unique web page if you sign on than if you sign on. You might have a completely different search experience because everything is driven by what you are asking the website. Has anyone seen the Brunello Cucinelli AI? Anyone? It's a beautiful site. You guys should check it out. One of the coolest, most immersive things that I've seen. Now, what's interesting is they also had a very terrible quarterly report, but they were like, oh, we did this really cool AI project. We're investing in the future. So what do you do whenever things are struggling as a brand? You just say you're using AI. That's a new thing. So that's your stock benefit. That's your ROI right there. Separate discussion. But what it shows is that there's an investment in making experiences on the web just as immersive as in real life. And AI can code in real time such that these experiences are ever evolving, dynamic, and driving personalized shopping experiences. I think one of the greatest benefits of generative AI is that nothing is static anymore. Everything is dynamic. Everything's immersive. You just have to figure out these new interfaces that allow that exploration to be driven. The last thing here for customer experience, this is one of my predictions, but I think we're going to have a return to in-store. Does anyone in here feel that same way? I think, yeah, there we go. Honestly, now my fiance's back in the room, so don't tell her what I said earlier. But I hated going to the grocery store, like hated it. San Francisco, trying to park at a grocery store was awful. Trying to get anything at a store was awful because you had to drive, you had to park, and you're not finding parking in downtown San Francisco. But then I realized that I hated being on my phone. I hated going to these websites all the time after being on my computer. I hated not interacting with people and being part of the world. And then I hated seeing all these AI generated ads, unfortunately. And so that drove me to wanting to be at the grocery store, wanting to go to these stores, wanting to try things on, wanting to experience those things, the original immersive experience, if you will. And so I think that as AI content becomes more and more and more prevalent, we're going to have this overwhelming amount of content at the beginning before platforms figure out how to police it. And that's going to push people back to in-store experiences. So I really think you're going to see an investment to brands to be both in-store, obviously in a way that makes financial sense, but also have these AI interactive experiences as well. And so Leap is doing some really interesting stuff on how do we create data lakes from in-store experiences that can then help power some of these digital bridges between digital and in-store. So this was the quote that I meant to have before the other one, but as I said, I think one of the greatest opportunities is making every experience dynamic. Every experience is now going to be personalized to you. I think there's some echo chamber risk to mitigate of something like that, where it's going to ask you, or it's going to give you only the things that you want to see. We see that with algorithms across social media platforms. But I do think that largely when you're talking about commerce, the more personalized you can get, the more revenue that you're going to get. We've already seen 6 to 10% is the average uptick when you're delivering personalized experience across retail brands. And I see that going up and up and up because you're going to start to have more proactive personalized shopping experiences rather than you having to come and search and discover yourself. Now, last piece here, how does this impact retail sales? So we talked a little bit about this, perfect segue. I think that you're going to have proactive selling and discovery. I don't think that in the past, what we've had is like SMS campaigns, email campaigns. Someone in a room decided that you were part of some cohort that they thought had a high propensity to buy, had been to the website a couple of times. And so you got an email or an SMS message. And that was great, but like it knew nothing about you. I don't have any kids and I got a message to buy a stroller. I don't know if that was being suggestive, but one of the things that I think here is that you're no longer going to have this mismatch of like knowledge of you and actually starting your shopping experience. I think you're going to have a much more proactive selling and discovery experience. It's going to become, hey, I know that you bought this last month. You know, here's a complimentary good for this. Or, hey, I know you returned this. Can you tell me why? And then you give the answer and it comes back with another recommendation. I think you're going to start to see a lot of discovery be more proactively driven. You're already starting to see some brands invest in this technology via owned apps, owned commerce channels. And I think that's going to become more and more prevalent and maybe even become table stakes in the not so distant future. Basically, think about the technology selling for you. Second piece, I think, is connected communications. Similar, but what this theme that we're starting to see drive is across a bunch of different channels. Does anyone here know what Beehive is? Anyone? I know you do. Yeah. Yeah, so Beehive started as a newsletter platform. If anyone's familiar with the Morning Brew newsletter, one of the early people there started their own newsletter company. They were originally Creator Brand, but they've made their newsletter platform into an ad network so everybody can make money off of their newsletters. And just recently this week, they've now stood up a way for your newsletter to become an app. And they're standing up a way for it to become a website. So what that benefit is you now have connected experiences across every different content channel that you could think of using that ad network that's supported. And so you're starting to have connected experiences with your customers across a bunch of different mediums, a bunch of different channels, a bunch of different platforms. Last but not least, I think is omnichannel is coming more and more as table stakes, and not just from you have to be present everywhere, but that there's an ever-growing number of channels. And the only way you're going to be able to be on all those channels is if AI is helping you repurpose, AI is helping you be present, and AI is helping you optimize content to each of those platforms and the audiences that are there. to me, it seems the only way that you're going to be able to do that. And so BigCommerce is focusing on some of those. Amen. So what's stopping the future of retail? So I wanted to play a game real quick. Very easy game, don't worry, no one has to get up. I'm just gonna ask you to raise your hands. You can raise your hand more than once, but I'm gonna see how quickly this shakes out. So how many of you have tried to implement AI in your daily life or at a company? Pretty much everybody. Good. That's what I thought. All right, we're off to a good start. So of those of you, well, everyone, how many of you felt that you didn't use AI more because you weren't properly trained? Wow, that was surprisingly little. For those of you that tried to implement it at your company, did you run into any issues with not having the right data for it to be effective? Yeah? Hands up? Okay, cool. Cool. What about not knowing what prompt to use? Did any of you run into prompt issues? Okay, cool. That's a big one. And then how many of you just didn't even start because you didn't know where you were supposed to start with AI? Sounds like very few. Okay, cool. So we actually did a survey of our own customers, and this is kind of where it all played out. So the number one thing was data was too unstructured to bring into an AI platform. No one knew what to do. No one knew how to get the data that they needed to power the workflows that they needed. Surprisingly, in many conversations, people don't even know the data that goes into their own current workflows. So we're talking about people not understanding their own process before they try to get an AI to do it, which is, there's so much wrong with that, but that's a whole separate discussion. Second was training. So a funny story, I met up with a guy that runs Copilot for Microsoft. And I asked him, well, how's Microsoft benefiting from Copilot itself? How are they using it? And they said, well, everybody's got a license, but no one knows what to do. So the people selling the most AI software outside of OpenAI don't even know how to train their own people to use it. So that gives me a little bit more confidence that all of us are doing just fine. I think the third one is interesting C-suite buy-in. Funny enough, I think this is the easiest problem to solve because C-suite sees stock price up if I mention AI in the earnings report. So I'm going to say that I'm going to do it, some innovation budget, someone else figure it out. Time takes to set up. I actually think this is a lot shorter than what most people think. The real crux of this is if you are in a regulated industry and you need privatized models deployed, that's where it can take some time to set up and ultimately flows into the next bucket, which is cost. The last part is data privacy and security. I personally think that this is a little overblown because if you're using AI to say just write copy, you're probably not feeding personal information into it. It's not something where you need this like very robust security system, but I get it. People in compliance and their lawyers, they want to make sure that they're being very risk averse here. Their job is to protect the company, not to enable innovation. So data privacy and security, depending on use case, can be very important. But in most cases, I've seen that risk being a little bit more overblown than it needs to be. But I think the real answer, I was mentioning this earlier, pretty much every sentence I've said, is what's stopping retail AI is data, is plain up data. Most people don't know what data they need to customize the AI to their environment. They don't know what data they need to let the AI make a decision and drive one way or the other. And most AI solutions, such as conversational commerce for experience, people will take information like linen, maybe size 7, maybe available in these colors, and they'll put that in the back of a chat bot. And someone will ask like, hey, I'm going to a wedding in Miami. Like, what do you recommend? Well, the AI doesn't know that linen means breathable and that linen means it can actually sustain warm weather events. It doesn't know any of that. That's a whole nother semantic layer that needs to be built for these AI solutions to actually work. Unless you mentioned linen somehow in that search, it's not coming. So for these richer, conversational, more personalized experiences, we need a whole nother layer of data to power these AI systems. So if you're doing large scale AI work, you're doing anything at your retail brand, the number one thing that I want you to leave this room with is that you need to invest in the data layer. And there's ways that you can use AI to create that data layer. but I would invest in data before I invest in technology. And I think that's why we're in this big trough of disillusionment, is that most organizations' data is already messy. And we're trying to jam that messy data into a system and say, figure it out for me, AI. That's not it. So invest in data, invest in building great pipelines, and your AI projects will be immensely more successful, more reliable, and you won't end up like the Chevrolet dealership that ended up selling a car for $1. So avoid that risk, invest in your data. I want to spend the last couple minutes on talking about how do you figure out what's going to be effective for your brand. Very simple process. Remember, this is a very intimate setting. We're allowed to do this. We're allowed to explore. But I think the first thing that I will recommend to you is just think about your business goals. When ChatGPT first came out, everybody's like, I'm going to ram AI into this process no matter what anyone tells me. I don't care what it costs. I don't care how many people it hurts. I don't care how complicated it is. And I think we've had a sobering of that reality. I think people have thought about, okay, does this problem even need AI? Is it going to take me more work to get this done than if I just hire an intern, if I hire someone over, or I hire another headcount? I think that we need to return to a sober way of thinking about business and how it's run. And that's why I always encourage people to think about what are your pain points operationally. So better way to say this first step, start with what you hate. Start with the thing that you hate doing the most, and then go from there. The things that you hate doing the most will free you up to do the things that make you the most happy, and they will ultimately be the things that you want to invest in getting off your plate. I think there's a famous quote out there that's like, I wanted AI to do my laundry and clean my dishes, not create my artwork and write my books. I generally agree with that. If we had a laundry AI, I would be all about that. But start with what you hate, and you'll be willing to offload that work and let the AI kind of take care of it. I think the second piece here is research. So more and more, you're seeing brands take on values. You're seeing brands take on practices that are more emblematic of what we typically expect of humans. I would always encourage you to work with technology providers that are aligned with those types of values and those types of objectives. Those are very important to branding. You don't want to deteriorate those. Once you have those things kind of in place, move into the third step and just assess the scalability and compatibility with your systems. We talked about data, right? Well, if you don't have any data practices, you don't know where any of your data comes from or how to extract data from those systems, then your AI system probably isn't going to be all that successful. So I would say prioritize the things that you think would be scalable, the things that you think you can address now. Fourth step is just pilots. Plain and simple, there's a lot of pilots going on right now. We've been doing a lot of pilots. So you got to find use cases. The jump from step 3 to step 4 is finding the use cases that you know you're going to do on regular occasion, and then turning those into pilots. Best practices for doing pilots: find a segment of data that you can cordon off to be used as dummy data and work with startups, work with solutions providers. You also want to find someone that can dedicate some of their time to running these pilots. Ultimately, you need to have a measurable success metric where you're not going to be able to achieve a successful pilot that can then scale into a full-scale solution. This is typically the step that everybody gets lost, because innovation budgets are dedicated to pilots, but they're not dedicated to annual contracts. So make sure that if you are running pilots, someone can be on charge of it, but also has a way of measuring the success of it. For us, we did a couple pilots with some large scale retailers. We ended up doing a presentation to the board. The number one thing I can tell you is that the board doesn't understand anything other than, like, does it make me money for less money going into this process? The answer to that is yes. You're usually going to get a thumbs up. That's the best way to describe it. Once you've done all that, go back to the beginning, start over, new use case, find it yourself. But I like checklists. I read this book called The Checklist Manifesto. I didn't really like the book, didn't really like the author, but what I did like is that checklists allow you to be more procedurally driven. And I like to simplify the hell out of all of it. So 4 questions. You can take a picture of this. I'll send out the slides later. But basically, what are my business goals? Flow those business goals into what workflows and functions will ultimately drive them. And then how do these workflows currently happen? And then lastly, is this something that I do regularly? Once you have the answers to those, you got your use cases. Go find the AI provider, the AI tool that's going to help you do that. Depending on what type of industry you're in, maybe you add something about, like, do I need a privately deployed model? Do I need something on-prem? Usually your IT team's going to tell you. Ultimately, what you need to build is a narrative that's easy to understand, that's going to get people to buy into that idea. It makes more money. It reduces my operational costs. For $20 in, I get $60 out. simplify it down to the very, very simplest statement that you can have. You tie it into your business goals, you can get buy-in rather easily. Now, this last bit is just some predictions. Feel free to disagree with them. I think largely I've been proven wrong and proven right quite a few times in this fast-moving industry. But there's a lot of people, including BCG and I think Goldman recently, that said that there was no killer app, no killer use case for generative AI. Question for you, did any of you use GPT-3 in the early days? Wow, okay, great, awesome. So did you guys know that 85% of all GPT-3 API usage was for SEO? All of it. Like the other 15% was social media copy. It's still around that. So there's a lot of developers that will say like, yeah, coding is a big use case, but the killer use case for AI is programmatic SEO. Chatbots are coming on, but there's still some kinks to be worked out for this to be largely scalable and largely reliable. Programmatic SEO is the killer use case. So if anyone tells you otherwise, know that they're just trying to sell you something else. I'm here to talk some sense into you. I think conversational commerce, as the chatbot stuff gets worked out, as the right data pipelines get fed into it, as the right guardrails get established, I think it's going to become table stakes. Everybody's going to expect 24/7 on support where you can actually take actions and not just get referred out to someone or have someone not available because operating hours aren't there. I think you're going to have this 24/7 brand idea, and I think AI is going to be able to be your leverage to make that a reality. We already mentioned it, but I think AI is going to drive in-store shopping over the next decade. I think there's some really strategic investments happening to in-store. I think you're seeing a large uptake of in-store experiences. I think the way in-store works is changing quite a bit. It's becoming a lot more immersive, a lot more experiential. So maybe you're not having like the static, here's all my inventory out on the floor. But I think in-store is going to be a necessity if you want to be a brand in these next waves. Maybe you can rent out some of the old Macy's offices. I don't know. We'll see. And then I think everybody thinks chatbot and they think like this really awful customer support experience. And I think it's a disservice to the opportunity, which is AI and chatbots as marketing channels. There's startups that we've been working with where you can put your affiliate links and your product links into a chat experience such that when someone's in someone else's chatbot, your results are getting prioritized. So think of it as AI search or generative search, but your products are coming up as part of the recommendations in those processes. But what we're starting to play with is, can we build a chatbot where it's almost its own ad network? We're working with some interesting real estate owners where they have localized data for all the brands that are in their properties. And so we can build them a media channel that's localized. And so now they can start to make money off of referring people to different stores. So think about these as marketing channels. Think about these as ways to make money in addition to your core business. And then I think the last piece, we all kind of would agree that we're going there, but I think you're going to interact with AI as seamlessly as you're interacting with current teammates. Are there Slack users in the room? Yeah, I use Slack all the time. It's annoyingly to my teammates, I'm sure. But I think Slack has fundamentally the best opportunity for AI of any company in the entire world right now, if they execute it properly, because AI should literally be turned on as easily as you're in the marketing channel for your company, and an AI is there helping you guys sort through what you're trying to execute. I think that it's going to become that seamless. I don't think that we're there yet, probably 2-3 years out, but I do think it's going to become more and more seamless as we start to think about how we work. The last thing, I wanted to make a regular thing of this. So if you guys enjoyed the presentation or didn't, but you're still looking for some community, you want to learn about AI, you want to make it really simple, I'm setting up a group that focuses on retail and AI in Chicago. It's not a paid thing. No one's going to try to sell you anything. I'm just looking to meet cool people working on interesting stuff. And this was the hard launch of that. So if you enjoyed what we talked about, or you want to learn more about AI, or you're just looking to meet cool people doing cool things, this is going to be the way that we do it. So hopefully the start of something very beautiful. Everybody scanned it, the 1 and 2? Looks like it. Perfect. I'll send it out with the form on the back end. But lastly, just some big thank yous. So I worked with CoreSite Research out of New York. Deborah there is amazing. She is ultimately weirdly responsible for how this event even happened in the first place. Also GS1, Y of AI, Simon, and then Silverside AI are all partners of ours. They fed information into this, helped come up with some of the themes that we saw in the previous slides. but they're also enablers of our technology getting out into the wild. So big thank you to them. And with that, I am done talking. So any questions from the room? Awesome. We got a lot. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, go for it.
Triangle, good, fast, cheap.
Yeah. Totally, totally. I definitely presume that triangle from more of a customer perspective. So the end consumer of those outputs. Now, we can debate on a separate theory that I have that it doesn't take billions of dollars to train quality AI models. We trained ours for less than $100,000, but we have a very technical team, had very specific use case we developed it for. If you're going after AGI, probably a different story. I think there is a much broader question about organizational impact of some of these technologies that doesn't really neatly fall into that triangle. But I think as an end consumer of the technology itself, I think you definitely can get a lot closer to having all three at once. But I would say, yeah, it does take a little bit of an initial investment for you to be able to reap those benefits out. I think you next. Yeah. So one of the benefits of the model that we built is it's uncensored, not uncensored from the it's going to generate dirty stories, but some people use it for that. It's weird, but it's more so around like regulated industries, right? Like for some reason, I believe in sex positivity, sex wellness, those types of things, and those companies are like largely precluded from using generative AI because of the censorship that most of the big foundational models have. So I definitely think that cannabis companies can use it, that we have cannabis companies using our product to do promotional types of content. I think it gets a little tricky with regulatory environment. For us, we've chosen that we will enable people to use the technology, and ultimately it's their choice how they're going to comply with the regulatory environment. I think that works until it doesn't work. So usually smaller players, usually within single state. We've had some discussion with multi-state, but usually it's single state one. Yeah. So the opportunity is definitely there. We see it. We built towards it. But yeah, I think there's huge opportunities there, and it's only going to get easier as more regulation passes. It's more so the latter, but we're always like we've we've built a platform that's intentionally like agnostic to industry, but allows for any industry to extract value. No, that's not how we play. We're friendly puppies, right? Yeah. Uh, I have a couple friends that work in the cannabis industry, and banking is a nightmare there. Geez, everybody's just getting wildly crazy about that. So let's definitely talk. We can do some stuff for you. I saw your hand, I think. Yeah. Yeah, so I think it comes back to two things. One is the semantic data layer we were talking about. I think the more rich that you can make your data, the better results you're going to have for everybody. The better you're going to be able to address edge cases. You're going to be able to understand what consumers want. You're going to be able to establish relationships across your product catalog that are going to identify upsell opportunities. So that's always the first thing I recommend to people is like enhance and enrich your data to a level that will support the types of things you want to do. And then I think the second piece is like you have to work with teams that know how to manipulate and improve these models. I would say the large majority of AI startups are building on someone else's model. That's not a good or bad strategy. I'm not here to opine on that. But for us, we built our own. We have the people that can do it. We have the people that can mold the models, train the models, change the models. I think having that layer of adaptability and understanding allows you to progressively improve these models. I think we all can largely agree that like they're not all the way there yet. They're not 99%. I'd say they're probably 90%. And if you've invested in data, maybe take it from 90 to 95%. But I think you have to have someone that's understanding the language, the queries that are being asked, and then progressively improving that and incorporating that and how the systems work. So those are the two main pillars, I would say. I'm sure there's a bunch of other smaller things, but those would be the two main drivers. Thanks for the question. Yeah. 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 So there's a couple different examples of that. Um, let's take a multi-brand retailer, for instance. You're largely at the discretion of the information being shared by the brands that you're selling. Some of those brands have been around for a while. They've invested in data systems, so they know by SKU what the sizes that they have are, the shape, the refinement material. They have all of that nice and neat in a CSV. But maybe an emerging brand, you don't have any of that information. You don't have any of the data tags. You don't know what the shape is, the color is, any of that stuff. So then you try to plug both of those retailers or both those brands' data into your e-commerce site that you're operating as a retailer. You're not going to be able to query across those things. Someone might put in purple, but not be able to find it. So I think basic data tags have been one thing. I think the other thing that people don't have is I can't tell you the number of brands where they have great product photography and they have no information about the product whatsoever. So like a massive use case for us in terms of revenue driving activity has been product descriptions. So you're literally taking computer vision, you're looking at their products, you're deriving a bunch of data tags, then you're taking those data tags and you're turning that into copy that sits on the product detail page that ultimately engineers search traffic. So I think that's ultimately the types of data that you're getting. So the first is just like basic data tag, basic information that feeds your PIM system. And then the second investment of data that I was talking about was like, well, how do you take that information and turn it into the answers to questions? So if we believe that search and discovery is more conversational now, you need to understand what linen means. You need to understand that a zipper bag versus a non-zipper bag, what does that mean? You need to understand what all these different colors will mean. You need to understand different materials as it would pertain to maybe skin allergies. So I've had someone where they've asked like, hey, I have eczema or I have bad allergic reactions to certain metals. Well, if you don't know what metals will activate that, or if that's not in your data information, you're not going to be able to answer questions like that. So these are all things that you can invest in making sure that your systems have in place to ultimately answer those questions. Does that, I hope, provide some context? Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Oh, wow. What does your company do? I'm curious. Oh, fantastic. Oh, great. That's that's, that's awesome. Yeah, to be honest, I'll be quite transparent. I think a lot of the benefit will accrue to online experiences to start, and then connecting those online experiences to in-store. So when you say offline, my hope is that like people are still like going to stores, they have their phones, those types of things. or they have an app from the retailer that they're kind of using a lot of this technology through so that you get the benefit of having that customer view in store and digitally. But I think a lot more benefits are going to accrue to in-store or to e-commerce and online commerce. I haven't really thought about that question before. That's actually an interesting one. I'll have to think about it and get back to you on it. Yeah. 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 And I've actually seen some of the mall providers that we work with have turned Wi-Fi off because they just expect people's phones have data. I'm like, but you're losing an opportunity to engage. So, no, yeah, it's kind of what. No, I hadn't really thought about that. Well, thank you. Now I'm gonna be up late thinking about how to make offline retail work too. Yeah, like my head's going towards like edge LLMs. Like we developed a very, very small LLM that can be on device and doesn't have to be connected to the internet. But then it's like, how do you get that into the space? How do you get that on people's devices that you? Oh, let's chat. That's interesting. Any other questions? No. All right. Well, this is the part where I say thank you for your time, and that the first round is on me at Marshall's Landing. So if you guys want to go over there, we'll have some beverages, have some fun, have some conversation. But most importantly, enjoy the rest of your Tech Chicago week, and thank you for spending a little bit of your afternoon with us. Thanks, guys.